In this video I'm going to take a look at how you make a standard solution, and I've already mentioned the term on a previous video, but just a reminder, a standard solution is a solution of known concentration. So in the video I'm going to look at making a 250 centimetre cubed 0.75 moles per decimetre cubed standard solution of sodium chloride. So I'll get you to have a go at the first part yourselves. So I need you to work out for me how many grams of sodium chloride will I need to weigh out, and then obviously I'm going to dissolve them in water to make the solution. So obviously the first thing we need to do is work out how many moles of sodium chloride we need. So the concentration multiplied by the volume tells us that, and that's coming out at 0.1875 moles. We then feed those moles into the mass triangle to work out the mass of sodium chloride needed. So that's obviously moles times MR, and that comes out at, as the calculator value. We're using a 2 decimal place balance, and so we're going to need to weigh out 10.97 grams of sodium chloride. So we'll do that now. I've placed my empty weighing boat onto the balance and zeroed it. So I've transferred the sodium chloride from the weighing boat. You can see it's empty now. It's in the beaker, and what I'm going to do to make sure that every single last grain of sodium chloride ends up in there, we're going to wash, let's see if I can position myself, there we go, we're going to wash the weighing boat. So this term is called including the washings, so any little bits of sodium chloride will end up in that beaker. So it's safe to say now that that's well and truly washed. So I'm going to put some more water in here, and then we're going to dissolve the sodium chloride into this small amount of water. You can see that's completely dissolved now. So we need to get the stirring rod out of the beaker, but we don't want to lose any of the sodium chloride solution, so we need to wash the stirring rod, making sure that all of the sodium chloride is washed and goes into the beaker. So that's washed now, you can take it out. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to transfer our sodium chloride solution. We need to make 250 centimeters cubed. And you can see I've got this new flask here. This is called a volumetric flask, or sometimes known as a graduated flask. And you can see there it's got this volume marked on of 250 centimeters cubed, and that brown line there represents the 250 centimeter cube mark. So we need to transfer this solution here, which is about what, 120 or something centimeters cubed. That's going to go in there via the funnel, and then we're going to make it up to the mark using the water from the bottle. So I've done that, and you can see the beaker, it's empty now, but there are some droplets of sodium chloride solution. So again, I'm going to include the washings just to make sure that all of that sodium chloride ends up in the flask where we want it. So you would normally do that a couple of times just to make sure that you definitely get all of the solution. Okay, so now we're going to carefully make this up to the mark here. Now you can see I've deliberately stopped short of the mark there. Remember, we want this to be on that line because I want to talk about something called the meniscus. So I've included a little diagram which I'm going to refer to now. So because water has surface tension, it can grip to the glass in the volumetric flask, and it forms what's known as a meniscus. So it's this curved, the liquid actually curves rather than sits horizontally. So the blue line there represents the mark, the orange line represents the meniscus of our solution. And you can see I've written up there, it's the base of the meniscus that must sit on the mark. So we now need to very, very carefully add our water so that the meniscus, the base of the meniscus, sits on that mark. Now it's a good idea to make yourself eye level with the mark so you can see more clearly when your meniscus is in the right place. You can see I'm adding this very, very carefully, a drop at a time. We're still a little bit under, and yeah, that's it. So I'll bring that closer to the camera so you can see exactly what I mean there, but that's spot on the mark. So you can see there the base of the meniscus is sat exactly on the line, and that's what you need to make sure your solution is accurate. Nearly finished now. One of the last things you do, obviously with the lid on, put your finger over the top and just invert the flask, and that obviously makes sure that everything's definitely dissolved. And the only other thing we need to do now is we need to write on the flask what's inside, what's the concentration, and if you want, what date was it made. So we'll go through the steps one at a time. So to make a standard solution, the first thing you would do is weigh out a known mass of solid, and you should always record the mass. So when I measured mine out, I was exactly at the right mass. I think it was 10.97 grams. If you got 10.96 grams or 10.98, that's not a problem. You just record the mass so that when you come on to work out the concentration, you can factor in the slight change in mass. Once your solid's been weighed out, you would then transfer it to a beaker, and of course you would include the washings. The next thing you would do is you would dissolve your solid in a small amount of distilled water. Now I didn't mention the fact that this is distilled water at the time. This water here has been through a distillation process, and basically it's taken out all of the ions that are in water. So all we've got in here is absolutely pure H2O, nothing else. And that's important when you're making solutions that you're going to use in quantitative experiments, because other ions present could affect your results, or they could cause other reactions to take place. So we always use distilled water for this type of experiment. You would obviously rinse the stirring rod before you take it out, and again include the washings. You would then transfer your solution to a volumetric flask of the required volume. You can get different sized volumetric flasks, so we used a 250 cm cube flask because that's how much solution we wanted to make. And again you would obviously rinse the beaker and include the washings to this. You would then make your solution up to the mark, making sure that the base of the meniscus is sitting on the mark. You then put the stopper on and shake it to make sure that everything's definitely been dissolved. And obviously the final thing you would do is label your flask so that you know what's inside, what's the concentration, and when it was made.